So in the Buddhist tradition, before you give a teaching, you bow down to the throne or the image of the Buddha, or you prostrate. The main idea, for the sake of those who have no idea, the main reason for that is to reduce arrogance. Because it is very likely that when you have few students listening to you and sitting on a higher throne or higher chair, you might get puffed up, I'm somebody, you see. So therefore it is important, and normally like when the great teachers, before they ascend on the throne, they do the prostration and then snap their fingers 3 times, they like this. That is to say, everything is impermanent. You heard the sound, it's gone. It did not stay continuously. So that means if things are fragile, impermanent, why be arrogant? What reason is there to be arrogant, you see? So there's the purpose. So always when you start, you pay homage, you see, by bowing down. And in India we have this wonderful tradition of touching not only teacher but the senior people's feet. Now for many people it has just become a custom. I don't know how many people really think about the meaning. But this is a very important start, because the more you remain humble, the more you become receptive, the more you become arrogant and get yourself puffed up like an inflated balloon. Just as on an inflated balloon, if you put water, it will not stick, it will not stay there. So similarly, if you get inflated, maybe due to your physical strength, or maybe your money, maybe your wealth, whatever be the excuses, if you become arrogant, then you become blind. Then you will not listen to others, you will forget about taking care of others. As in English also we have a saying, pride goeth before a fall. See? So that pride goes away only when you fall, when you trip. So until to that extent you think you are somebody, see, but it's going to fall very soon. So therefore it's always important to that's why we are talking about this impermanence of the body, the feeling, the mind and so on, to bring back to our senses of understanding the reality, the way things are. The more we understand the reality, the things are, the more we are able to see that there is really no ground, no basis to get puffed up, to get arrogant. Not only there is no basis, but if you develop these negative emotions like pride, arrogance, it will gradually lead to your downfall. And that is what we see in the case of many world leaders. As and when they get elected, don't think I'm thinking somebody, okay? As and when they get elected, they get so puffed up, so arrogant, then they think they can do everything. No, you can't do everything. The silent majority of the people are also not completely dumb, they are not completely stupid. They also have some understanding of what it means to be a human being, what it is good for them, for other people. They have some idea, you see. Take the example of Mao Zedong, you know. He was an ordinary peasant in the beginning. But as and when he got the power, he got completely drunk by that power. And then he became insane. Take the example of Hitler. So many of these corrupt people, you know, they get, at the end of the day, they got completely insane. Hitler had to always keep a gun with him and always thought that I have to kill myself, that day will come. And it came. He shot himself and died. Mao Zedong could not trust anybody. Wherever he goes, he used to take his bed, you know, and other things. It is said that he keeps on changing the room all the time. So that's what we are talking about, in a realistic sense. We are not talking about just, oh, you can meditate, close your eye, you'll become Buddha. All this is possible, but we are not talking about like fantasies, We are not trying to create illusion. And that's also very important to understand, because many who are not, either have no time or no interest, then they make a hasty conclusion, thinking, oh, what is the use of these spiritual practices? All we need is money to make the life run immediately. And that's why Karl Marx made that famous statement, religion is opium. He had to make that statement, religion is opium, because in that Prussian, place, which was a Christian community at that time, and it's to some extent true today also. The top religious leaders and the political leaders, they are in league. They lead a very luxurious life. They support each other because the political leader has to get the power from the religious leader because he has a wide following. Similarly, the case with the other also. So they are always in league, and they make the poor people work. And especially some stupid religious teachers, they don't have that sense of responsibility and compassion for others. They would say, oh, you work very hard, you go, you do a lot of hardship, and then your negative karma will be purified and go to heaven. And they themselves wallowing in luxury. If hardship is only way to heaven, then why don't they work? It's as simple as that. So that's why Karl Marx made this statement, religion's opium, because when you take opium, it doesn't solve any problem, but it will create that fantasy that everything is okay, you see. You become high, if you take LSD or all those kind of intoxicant things. I know one Tibetan monk, very senior monk. He's a very funny monk. He's not a drug addict, but he sometimes does some strange experiment. So he told me once he did an experiment with one of these drugs. Then said the effect is so interesting that at one point he thought that maybe realization of emptiness is something like this. Everything becomes like almost essenceless, You can basically touch everything, everything is soft, that kind of feeling. So that creates only, if anybody has experience, you have the opportunity to explain this much better than what I'm trying to explain. I'm only, sharing what I've heard. You see. So that creates only illusion, fantasy, thinking that your problem is solved. But the problem is, of course, far from being solved. So at least in Buddhism, I can safely say this is not the case. Buddhism is training of the mind. Use your common sense, use logic, use reason. And that's why the Buddha repeatedly said that don't listen to me because I'm your teacher, but judge my words. And if you think this is relevant, useful in your life, then follow it. If not, don't. So this is for us serious practitioners, it's really, really important to spend time and read and see how much benefit we are getting for oneself, for others, at least for this life. And then in Buddhism, we of course say it's not for one life, it's for many lives. In Buddhism, we don't make 5-year plan, but we make several eons plan. So there's a big picture. The possibility is there, you see. So all this will become clear if you study and reflect and think. Then you will see that the cure, honestly speaking, the cure for all illnesses, physical illness, mental illness, is really there in the teaching. So it is short-sighted and stupidity to just think that material accumulation will solve all the problems. No, impossible. And that's why His Holiness Dalai Lama, when he goes around the world teaching, the first most important teaching that he gives to the rest of the world is how to preserve human values. He's not talking about Buddhism. That is most important point. Most important point is how to preserve basic human goodness, how to preserve basic human values. And now he is working all the more and promoting secular ethics education. If you don't like the word secular, because some countries, like in America also, in northern part of America, there is some resistance with the word secular. So if you don't want to use that word secular, in India, the constitution itself says secular constitution. It's not against any religion, it's not debasing any religion, but all are treated equal. Okay? So secular basically means not religious, not necessarily religious. So His Holiness very strongly feels the promotion of that basic universal human values, not based on any religion. There are many reasons. One, we are born with the need to have these human values, but not born with a religion. Two, in order to promote these human values, if you are to use religion, then which religion? Again, there will be fighting. Everybody will say, my religion is best. And then more importantly, out of the 7 billion human population, the majority, honestly speaking, are non-believers. Even those who say we are believers, because they say this because they are church goers or temple goers, maybe throwing some flower to the holy images and things, but in their personal life there's not much practice, not much knowledge. So majority, and especially in today's world, having seen some of the destructive things in the name of religion, many are turning away from religion. But they cannot turn away from the basic human values. So therefore His Holiness the Dalai Lama is saying the basic human values must be evidence-based. It should be based on common sense, common experience, scientific findings. Something that we all can relate to. It's a really wonderful idea. And this is very crucial because we have this stupid tendency, forgive me to use this word stupid, but really we have this stupid tendency of talking about the secondary and the third level of things. Which country you belong to, which religion you belong to, which nationality you belong to. We forget talking about the sameness, the basic human, as a human being. We're talking about the second, third level. The most important thing that we should be talking about is not asking about religion, things like that, but basically, as His Holiness always says, basically there is no need to introduce each other because I know you are a human being, I am a human being, we have the same feeling, you see. But human beings, our mind is so small. See, we always want to classify something, designate something, confine something, make the borders, boundaries, build the walls. Only few people talk about building the bridges. Now some people talking about building more walls. Bridges. So in Buddhism we are talking about building bridges. Because that's the reality. The reality is interconnected reality, undeniable interconnected reality. Fight as much as you can against the law of nature, you will never win. That's the bitter truth. All conditioned things are impermanent, but we should all unanimously agree, say, all conditioned, there's no conditioned thing, everything's impermanent, permanent, but you will die, showing that you are impermanent. Trees will fall, houses will collapse. On a daily, regular basis we see it, you see, the change. So nobody can control those forces. So it's therefore I'm saying that it's important to accept the law of nature. The law of nature is impermanent, is there, suffering is there, interconnected is there. Accept that. The advantage of accepting that is, one, you will all feel then connected to each other. Right? Two, there is then much more better chance of developing all the fine human qualities by working together, by sharing, loving, caring, working together. We can really make a miracle, produce a real heaven on this earth. I'm not just saying, this is my fundamental belief based on Buddhist teachings. It's possible. Once I was, when I was working in Tibet House in New Delhi, I worked there 2.5 years, several years back. So one Indian gentleman came to me. He was working in the Library of Congress. I still remember his name, Bhumik. So he said, can you give me some teaching? Because then he needed that for his work. I said, okay, you come after the office. So he used to come and we used to sit on the lawn and I tried to explain something. He would ask me some question and things like that. So one day, out of the blue, he asked me a very strange question by saying, since you are a monk, had studied Buddhism for some years, you must have some realization. Can you share, please? I was kind of caught out of the blue, you know. So I thought, I have no realization at all. But sometimes my mind is quick, you know. She said, yes, when you ask what is your realization, if you are asking whether I can fly or things like that, I have none. But on another stance I have. For example, I don't intentionally kill or steal. That is a realization. And as I said yesterday, imagine, for me it may not killing or not stealing may be not so significant, but imagine if in this whole world nobody steals, how peaceful the world will be then. So it is in this way you can see the impact of doing even a small good thing, you see. The impact is tremendous. Like if you have a peaceful neighbor who doesn't steal, who doesn't lie, you feel like safe. Contrarily, if you have a neighbor who you can't trust, you know, or maybe when I'm gone he might break my door and things like that. I mean, imagine. And that is there in today's world, you see. So therefore, even if you're not able to bring about great global transformation by one individual, but your personal transformation, your change of behavior is going to make a huge influence to whoever you come into contact. You're going to make the life of that person. And in my case also, I must share what I actually have seen or experienced. Of course, I've studied Buddhism a little bit, that's why I'm sharing, but otherwise I'm nobody, nothing. I have no experience, no realization, nothing. But because sincerely teaching the subjects that I've learned, the only good thing that I have is, I'm doing this not for money. That's 100% sure. And I have a very strong wish that they will get some benefit. That is there. So because of this, I have a number of people who told me several times that they have attended my teaching and their life completely transformed. You see, not because I have a magic wand or I'm special, I have a power to bless, not like that. Because some of these Buddhist teachings, they are so powerful, you know. When some of these teachings goes to the mind of intelligent person, it immediately clicks the mind of that person. Wow, I need to proceed from there, you see. You see? Your whole life completely undergoes that change, that transformation. And that is possible. That's why we are having this class. Right? In one of the Buddhist teaching, I think Aryadeva's 400 verses, he says, that means, in the case of a sick person, when that person is completely disturbed and agitated by illness, then that person has no capacity to perform any activity. He may be bedridden or mentally unhappy, suffering, pain, so everything. So he doesn't have that capacity to do any job, any work. Similarly, Aryadeva says, similarly, when your mind is disturbed, agitated by ignorance, confusion, that also disables you to perform any function. And that we can see clearly, as I said already, some of the examples of some people. They think they are intelligent, but they are really like lunatics, you know. So they don't really have that capacity to do anything good for themselves, for others. So many problems that we see in the world is a result of decision made by some powerful lunatics. Right? So therefore we are this time discussing about the close setting of the 4 close setting of mindfulness. 4 close setting of mindfulness. I was also tempted to read few things that I've written regarding meditation, why it is important. More and more people are seeking solutions for the stressful, time-urgent, overstimulated lives we lead. Because the media and mainstream medicine have failed to provide satisfying answers. Is this true? Yes, medicine really has brought great many benefits. I know the story, how much people suffered when there was no medicine. But today, too much medicine. For business, I don't know how many of these medicines are really reliable. How many of these different medicines have underwent, strict scrutiny, scientific scrutiny, experiment? I don't know. But you get all these countless labels and bottles saying this is good for your eye, vitamin B, C, D, E, F, G, H, up to Z maybe. And then people believe this is good for liver, good for eye. So you have to have everything, So in the West, more developed countries, you see people popping up handful of tablets. You see? I don't know how good that is, or whether it's really necessary. Right? So anyway, they are not able to get a real solution or answer from that. So therefore more and more people are turning, and in fact in increasing numbers, to time-honored practices like meditation for proven remedies to cure life's ills. Now when we say meditation, don't think meditation is religious or sacred. Don't think meditation belongs only to Buddhism. Meditation basically means sit down calmly. Sit down calmly, don't get stressed, don't get tension, calm your mind and think carefully to solve any problem. That's meditation. Even in ancient times, even the hunters, when they're hunting, they need to wait quietly, waiting for the animal, for the game, and then reflect. When one of your family members is dying or very sick, again, it doesn't do any good if you just run around shouting, crying. But you need to sit again calmly and do some prayers, meditations. So at times of stress and difficulty, what is really, really important, and in fact, before the stress and difficulty comes, it's important to be with yourself. To be with yourself means to remain calm means to be with yourself. Most of us, unfortunately, in today's world are not with ourselves. They were somewhere. We are floating. You are not inside, really, honestly speaking. You are always kind of extrovert, thinking about this, that, this, tomorrow, day after tomorrow, things like that. And then your own home, the real I or mind, is like an empty house which you kept locked without cleaning it. There's no light, no cleaning, nobody dusted it. So that's why the mind, the inside is falling apart. Even in the case of house, you need to regularly maintain it, whitewash it, clean it. No, isn't that true? So what do you do to clean your mind, your home? Hardly any. That's why we suffer. So therefore Buddhist teaching is basically saying, maintain your inner home. Come home, stay home, don't always go away. Come home. Meditation means coming home, be with yourself. It's only when you are with yourself you feel calm. Contrarily, when you get distracted to so many things, you are pulled into all 100,000 directions. How can you be a solid peace? Right? Whether you are seeking greater focus to get your job done more efficiently, less stress and more peace of mind, or a deeper appreciation of the beauty and richness of life, the simple practice of sitting down and turning your attention toward can do wonders for your body and your mind. We do a lot of physical exercise for the body. Similarly, we need to do more mental exercises. After all, out of the body and the mind is the boss, it's the more important thing, not the body. Right? Regular practice offers dozens of scientifically proven benefits. Not just Buddhism saying it's good. It is now scientifically proven. For example, from reduced stress and lower blood pressure and cholesterol levels of greater levels to greater empathy and enhanced activity. Jobs are done not by running. Jobs are done by sitting calmly, thinking and planning. Even in business, you cannot get things done just by running without planning, You need to see it and think and plan what I should do first, what I should do next. And then you start, it's so easy, you see. So it's not just running. Working is not running. Or that the real cause of suffering and stress is not what happens to you, but how your mind responds. That's the key. It's not what happens to you, but how you respond. Anything can happen to us. There may be earthquake, there may be famine, there may be fighting. So many things can happen to us. We cannot stop that. As I said, if you want to get happiness, then happiness has to be cultivated within oneself. And don't expect happiness will come from the changing situations and events. Changing situations and events are not under your control. But what you can do is how you would respond to those changing situations and events. If you don't carry it away by the changing situations and events, then you are a good meditator. Then you will be calm and peaceful. So therefore the Buddha in one of his Mahayana Sutra clearly says, don't let your mind become like a feather, bird's feather or a cotton. In the case of a feather or a cotton, with slight blow of wind, it is tossed around. So if your mind also acts like that small piece of cotton, how can you get peace and happiness? You'll be tossed all around by the fluctuations of the surroundings and people you meet, Impossible, you see. So therefore, how you respond to the changing situations and events, that is the test of the practice. And moreover, life in general and especially in today's life, in everyday life, your mind is consistently processing a barrage of sensations. हिंदी में बोलता है ना क्या क्या नहीं होता आजकल. Barrage of sensations. For example, visual impressions. There's everything that you want to see now. 60, 70 channels. Every day may be different, something to see. Then outside also so many things to see. Visual impressions, emotions and thoughts. Because all these visual impressions and so forth will act as a stimuli that will provoke all kinds of different emotions, positive, negative, violent, aggressive, whatever, and thoughts. So because of such a situation in our daily life, when you meditate, you narrow your focus, limit the stimuli, bombarding your nervous system, and calm your mind in the process. That's why great meditators, they isolate themselves, go into a more lonely place of solitude. I mean, it's not necessary for all of us to move into the forest and things like that, but what is important is we need to learn to remain quiet, alone, regularly. In the morning, do some meditation. Even otherwise, also you should just stay alone, think, read, do some prayer, meditation. There are so many things to do. And that's why I always tell people that one of the modern problem is we don't know how to live alone and also don't know how to live with others. Do means ek to hona chahiye na. You should be able to do one thing. Either you should know how to live alone. If you don't know how to live alone, you should know how to live with others. We are not good in any of these two. With others also we don't know how to live. Alone also. Many people ask me this question, Geshe, you live alone? Yes, of course, I live alone. You feel lonely? Well, that was when I heard this question for the first time. It was like quite strange question to me. Because I myself never thought about that. I always enjoy it. I'm always short of time. So loneliness comes when you don't know how to be with yourself or when you don't know how to live with others. You can't believe the paradox of life is that in a big city like Delhi has now like more than 20 million, right? Around 20 million, something like that. There are people suffering from loneliness. Somebody living in a population of 20 million suffering from loneliness. So loneliness is not physical isolation, it's mental isolation. Whereas the meditators, like some of the Tibetan meditators, they spend their whole life at the top of the mountain. Physically, they're isolated, but they don't feel lonely because their mind is connected to the rest of sentient beings. Every day they pray for the benefit of sentient beings and so forth. Every day they appreciate that I'm alive and able to do something for other people. At least I'm able to do some prayer, things like that. So they're filled with that happiness every day. Where those people who live with the big population and all running after this, running after that, not satisfied with this, neither satisfied with this, always hungry, never contented. So that's the problem, you see. So chasing the sensual objects, material objects, and expecting that all your happiness and peace will come from there is misplaced trust. Misplaced trust. So therefore it is important to learn to live in solitude alone. And in terms of actual meditation, now there are so many methods. You can do that by repetition of meaningful word or phrase, known as mantras, or mindful awareness of the present moment, or following your breath, or paying attention to the flow of sensations in your body. There are countless objects of meditation. The object can be anything, right? So there's one thing that I wanted to read. Then another thing, as I already mentioned earlier, that we all want happiness. In order to get the happiness, we need to change. Not only we as individuals have to change, but the society has to change for the good. That's for sure. That's for sure. The world has to change. Now, how to change? There are two opinions. One is the change has to come through a drastic change, through revolution. And many thinkers, political leaders, they thought about it and also brought about those revolutions under a lot of bloodshed. Russian Revolution, French Revolution, so many revolutions. But where are we today? Because those kind of revolutions were not revolution based on people's acceptance and understanding. They were forced revolutions. So the real revolution has to come, even though it's going to take time, but the real revolution has to come from the individual members of the society. Because it is through that way that we can hope to have real revolution or real change in the world. So it is wrong to think that I'm just one simple individual, I can, because normally in the West they put this example that as an individual you're just like a cog in the wheel, you know, when the giant wheel moves, the cog has to move. And some people actually told me this example. Then I started thinking, oh, if the cog in the wheel don't cooperate, probably the giant wheel will stop moving. Sometimes even a small, part of that wheel stops, then the wheel cannot move. And the English word individual comes from indivisible. Basically means indivisible from the world. So since you are an indivisible part of the world, we can play a big role. Okay? So change, whether we like it or not, has to come from the individual. That's one thing that I wanted to mention. And then the importance of mental calmness. Western scientists have found that 80% of our illness, such as rash, diabetes, backache, and heart attacks, are due largely to defilements caused in the mind. See? It's not just Buddhism saying. It's now scientifically proved. So still if you say, I don't care, then you're really the hardcore, the real stupid person, yeah? Psychiatrists have found that though there is a temporary relief to these illnesses through medicine, they recur, they come again, because the cause remains within our minds, see? If the anger or resentment is deep down, you will get many symptoms of that resentment. You may express it fighting with your family members, or in some cases like killing others, or you may be developing physical illnesses. So many symptoms are there. Frequent anger and hatred produce chemical which reduces our immunity to illnesses. See? The very immune system is destroyed. When we lose our kind thoughts and develop anger and hatred, immunity falls. If you say, why? This is the way things are. This is the law of nature. Our brain is hardly 2% of our body size, but it uses 20% of oxygen. Negative emotions have been found to use up more blood, and frequent anger and hatred cause psychological aging. So with the development of these negative emotions, you die when it's not time to die. For example, in the case of driver, he's angry, drive recklessly, and then has an accident and kills not only himself but also others. It's a common phenomenon. I have a book about this, how many hundreds and thousands of people lose their life due to road rage in America. There's a whole book on that. And then how much billions of dollars are cost for recklessness. Even in terms of, financial loss. Practice of meditation of loving kindness can work wonders. Scientists have proved that meditation for loving kindness restores chemical balance in the body, and even cholesterol levels fall. Not just by medicine, right? Not always will the situation be to your liking, as I said already. Don't expect all the situations will be favorable to you. Don't think that this tree is planted just for you. Don't think I'm here just for you. That's how we think, you see. We think, oh, that house is just for me, almost like. So something goes against you, then you get totally upset, you see. So not always will the situation be to your liking. You may not be able to change it. You can only change your mind. your attitude. If your neighbor makes too much noise, you can complain to the police. If your street is noisy, you can move elsewhere. But if your mind is creating all the chaos, what do? Where will you move? Recognize those circumstances that we can change and those that we have to accept. Right? So there are so many things like that. So I'm getting a little bit sidetracked. So let us talk a little bit more about the close setting of mindfulness. If you want to read, because this time I could not distribute the text, there are so many texts which talks about this mindfulness. But most of us are familiar with the Shantideva's Bodhisattva way of life. So if you read that, it is in the wisdom chapter. Okay? So I'll just quickly read it and you will be able to understand it. So first let me read something else actually. If I have brought that. In the Pali source, the four establishment of mindfulness, what was the teaching that the Buddha gave? Thus have I heard, on one occasion the Blessed One, which means the Buddha, was living in the Kuru country, where there was a town of the Kurus named Kamasadama. There the Buddha addressed the monks thus. He called monks. Then the monks answered, "Venerable Sir," they replied. The Blessed One said thus, "Monks, this is the one-way path for the purification of beings, for the surmounting of sorrow and lamentation, for the passing away of pain and dejection." See, reflecting on the reality is useful in this way. For the passing away of pain and dejection, for the attainment of the true way, for the realization of nirvana, namely the four establishment of mindfulness. Then the monks asked, "What are the four?" Here, a monk dwells contemplating the body in the body, ardent, clearly comprehending and mindful, having subdued the longing and dejection in regard to the world, and so forth, with the feeling, mind, phenomena, and so forth. So when he said, monks, you should dwell contemplating the body in the body, in Pali it's called anupasin. Contemplating the body in the body means that there's the object of maintaining mindfulness on the body. But he did not just say contemplating in the body. He said contemplating body in the body. Meaning he's not saying that when he says contemplate on the body, he's not saying, contemplate on your body and then see how people see your body, whether it is seen as strong, beautiful, handsome, how the world reacts to your body. He's not saying that. He's simply saying contemplating the body in the body, meaning contemplating in the body as it is. Not how it is perceived by other people. Strong, beautiful or not, not in that way, but the reality as it is. Right? So similarly, having subdued the longing, he said, contemplating the body in the body, ardent, atapi, in Pali it's called atapi. That means, ardent means contemplating in the body. Ardent means making effort. Clearly, it's called sampajano, clearly. Clearly, sometimes it has been translated also being alert. That means you should be really present there. One of the most important features of this mindfulness practice is that you should be always present where you are. As I said already, normally we are not present. The house is empty. You are eating, but you are not tasting. You are thinking something else. Right now, even here, right now you are sitting, but your mind may be shopping in New York. I mean, everything is possible. The mind is so, how should I say, the mind is so, it's like lightning. It's very difficult to handle the mind. It's going everywhere. So that's another reason that it needs training. Otherwise, it's just like a small naughty child, which is so difficult for the parents to control. It may be trying to jump from the window or whatever, So therefore, it's important to be present, whatever you are doing. And not just physical presence, but mental presence. If your mental presence is there through mindfulness, then you will enjoy life. We don't enjoy life because whatever you are presented right now, you are not enjoying that. You are thinking about tomorrow. Or in many cases, thinking about what has happened in the past. So therefore, in this practice, it's saying don't sacrifice the present for the past and for the future. But enjoy the past. Future is yet to come. Nobody has seen it. You can make certain plans, but it's stupid to waste your time thinking about past, future. You have no idea what will happen, whether there is tomorrow or not. Nobody knows. Today may be the last day. Who knows? Really, honestly speaking. And the past is gone. However beautiful it is, it's gone. However horrible it was, it is gone. There's no point, thinking too much about it, except probably learning some lessons. Not so much. So live in the present. And that's why Aryadeva in his 400 verses, he says, Sulang somba shechawa simji kichik lehi mes. Kivu tingi mere watena dangni sheba goyon sedwa. Whoever you are, he says. When you talk about being alive, it's just one moment. Sulang somba shechawas. Sombo sedi. The so-called being alive. Simji kichik lehi mes. It's just one moment of the mind. So being alive is not like living 100 years. Being alive is not necessarily like living 20 years or 30 years. It's not necessary that you have to make a sum total, counting of all this 20, 30 years that you live. Living means living now. One moment. If you miss this one moment, you could not live. It is as serious as it is. That's why there is importance to be in the present, so that you are living. So sometimes we jokingly say, "Hello, are you there?" Yeah, really, this is a good call. Hello, are you there? We are not there, yeah. We are not there. Yes, body is there, but mind is not there. Individuals don't realize this, the need to be alive each and every moment. Therefore, there is hardly anybody who understands himself. Very difficult. Therefore, you don't know yourself. So these are like wisdom teachings of great sages who just spent not one day or few months and things like this, spent from Buddhist viewpoint several lives contemplating on this secret meaning of life or everything. And therefore again the Master Shantideva says, if you don't know the secret nature of the mind, even if you aspire to have happiness and wish to shun suffering, you will end up just wandering aimlessly. And that's what we are doing, we are wandering aimlessly. Today, oh no, today, no, I'm busy for this, that. Then tomorrow comes, tomorrow also, no, I'm busy for that. So for doing these great things, you have no time. And I remember this occasion very clearly when His Holiness was teaching Mahamudra, that also several years back, to a group of people from France. So during the question answer, there was one lady who got up and said, Your Holiness, your teaching is so good, but in the West we are so busy, we have no time. See? And then His Holiness said, whether you want to practice a religion or not, it's up to you. So I thought, His Holiness, this time you're a little bit blunt. But he was not blunt, he was really telling the truth. He said, nobody is forcing you to do these practices. If you don't see any purpose, any reason, nobody is forcing you, don't do. If you see some benefit, if you see the importance, then you have to find time. Football players find time. Musicians find time to practice music because they have interest. They have interest. Now for this kind of practice, I have no time, Meaning, there are many other important things to do. The other important things, you know what they are. It's only when I have some time, then I do it. So it's wrong prioritizing, So therefore, I always tell people that this kind of thinking, cultivating this kind of thinking, should be really like the national highway. You can, when you travel on the national highway, if you are a little bit tired, you want to stop your car for a cup of tea, then of course you can go by the side and take a little bit of time and rest. That's okay. That's okay. But the main dedicated line should be there, because the whole life is connected to this one important project. If that is not there, then there will be no kind of real life. So then I'll do more reading from this sutra. Contemplation of the body. Now before you do these practices, the text suggests that first you should do mindfulness of breathing. And how does a monk develop contemplating the body in the body? Here a monk, now in this case he was giving teaching to the monks. So here a monk gone to the forest, place of solitude, where there's less disturbance. So normally when somebody wants to do meditation, then they choose place of solitude. So there are certain necessary conditions. But even if you go to the forest, then the text clearly says it should be a forest where it is calm and nobody disturbing, but at the same time be careful if it is not full of wild animals, So all these practical things you need to consider. And also place of isolation doesn't mean that you move so high into the mountain that you have difficulty getting your food. Go 2 days up to the mountain, 3 days coming down, no use, wasting time. Right? And then also the place where you meditate should be closer to some other good spiritual meditators and practitioners. Because if you find some difficulty, if you have some questions, then there should be some teacher to whom you can go. So all these practical things. So place of isolation doesn't mean that you completely isolate yourself from food, from spiritual friends and so forth. So you choose that to the foot of a tree or to an empty heart, sits down, having folded his legs crosswise. Now legs, there are different physical postures are being told, but the most important thing is the meditation is done by the mind. Straighten his body. Straighten his body also doesn't mean that you become rigid. The purpose of maintaining physical posture is so that there is easy flow of energy, wind. Because when there is proper flow of energy, the mind which is riding on the energy also will be clear. So it's better you can study like this than reclining. You can do it through reclining or even sleeping also, but that's not easy. Okay? Sits down, having folded his legs crosswise, straightened his body, and established mindfulness in front of him. Just mindful. Now mindfulness means here in this case the object of mindfulness practice is breath. Just mindful, he breathes in. Mindful, he breathes out. Normally, automatic. We are not cognizant of what is going out, what is coming in. Breathing in and out is automatic, right? So sometimes even when we have a problem, we don't notice it, you see. Right? So just mindful, he breathes in. So let your mind ride on the breath. Mindly imagine the mind somewhere on the tip of the nostril, from where the breath goes out, almost riding on it, and don't think anything else. Just watch the breath. This is a very easy beginning meditation, because breath is something that is there with all of us. So that's why this is recommended as a kind of precursor to meditation. And another reason of suggesting to do the meditation in the start, watching the breath, is because if you watch on the breath, gently going out and gently coming in, that will settle you down, that will settle your mind. Only when your mind is settled, then you can do other kinds of meditation. Like for example, when you are angry and fighting, you can't meditate because your mind is not settled. Right? And that's why in Buddhism we talk about the three trainings: morality, concentration, wisdom. Three most important practices, trainings. And out of these three, the first is morality. Morality is said to be the ground for the calm abiding meditation. Because morality means basically not harming others, helping others, collecting virtuous practices. If you are somebody who is not harming others, helping others, doing good things, your mind will be calm. A very clever teaching, you see. Your mind will be calm. If your mind is calm, then you can meditate. Then you can develop wisdom. Therefore, morality is said to be like the ground where all the animate and inanimate objects move. In Hindi it is called shil. Shil. Shil is something like shitalta. Shil. Because when you practice these ethical disciplines and morality, you will not be scorched by the heat of anger and other negative emotions. The mind will remain calm and cool. If the mind is calm and cool, then you can do miracles. If your mind is disturbed, as I already said, that when your mind is disturbed, agitated by ignorance, then you don't have the capacity to do anything. Arey kya karu, main itna gussa tha, kuch bhi nahi kiya maine. That's what we say in Hindi, you know. We're very fond of speaking in Hindi. Right? So, just mindfully breathe this in, mindfully breathe this out. Then if the breathing is long, breathing in long, he understands I breathe in long, or breathing out long, he understands I breathe out long. Breathing in short, he understands I breathe in short. See, that's what I'm saying. If you are unable to breathe long, then you are immediately able to realize that why I'm breathing so short. I see. Am I suffering from blood pressure? Huh? He trains thus, I will breathe in experiencing the whole body. So you are coming back. You are alive now. Normally you are not so alive. Now you are alive. I will breathe out experiencing the whole body. He trains thus, I will breathe in tranquilizing the bodily formation. He trains thus, I will breathe out tranquilizing the bodily formation. Just as a skilled lathe worker or his apprentice, when making a long turn, understands, I make a long turn, or when making a short turn, understands, I make a short turn. So too, breathing in long, a monk understands, I breathe in long. He trains thus, I will breathe out, tranquilizing the bodily formation. In this way, he dwells contemplating the body in the body internally, or he dwells contemplating the body in the body externally, or he dwells contemplating the body in the body both internally and externally. Now, internally means not only your internal body, but also the senses, all the different parts of the body, be it your eye sense, ear sense, this internal body. External body could be your external body also could be body of others also. Okay? In this way, he dwells contemplating the body in the body internally, or he dwells contemplating the body in the body externally, or he dwells contemplating the body in the body both internally and externally. Or else he dwells contemplating the body, its nature of arising, or he dwells contemplating in the body, its nature of vanishing. For example, you can also imagine your body arising means like almost like taking birth, vanishing means dying. Okay? Or he dwells contemplating in the body its nature of both arising and vanishing. Or else mindfulness that there is body is simply established in him to the extent necessary for bare knowledge and repeated mindfulness. And he dwells independent, not clinging, see, now mark this, and he dwells independent, not clinging to anything in the world, seeing things as it is. That's the most important thing in our daily life, saying things as it is, seeing things as it is, thinking things as it is. That is how a monk dwells contemplating the body in the body. The 4 postures. Oh, time is flying. Okay, I'll stop here.